Nice spring in Kiev comes. It didn't work out, unfortunately, this year. We don't have such bad weather usually. The good thing is that usually such cold temperatures increase the consumption of gas, which we still continue to import. But maybe some of you have seen the good news yesterday about the decision of the Stockholm arbitration, which went in favor of Ukraine, and net Ukraine is now owed over $2.5 billion from Gazprom. I believe that the minister and then Prime Minister later, and in the afternoon we have a workshop with the commercial director of Naftagaz. We'll learn more about this process and when we will get the money. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you. It's our 14th annual investor conference. You will enjoy a very extensive program and great lineup of speakers representing the government, the parliament, politicians, diplomats, and the leading IFIs. And you'll be able to form a very good view of where Ukraine is heading and where the best investment opportunities are. Without trying to prejudge now your own opinion, let me just share with you what we as Dragon, who have been doing business here in Ukraine for the last 22 years, how we read the situation and how we vote with our own money. Since 2000, we have been investing at least half of our capital in private equity and real estate. And by the year 2013, we felt extremely uncomfortable with the development of the investment climate and with the government policies, and divested most of that private equity portfolio. We have followed the situation over the following 2 years, and by the middle of 2015, we decided that the worst is behind, that the macroeconomic situation has stabilized, and it's time to invest again. And in the middle of 2015, we have done our first private equity investment in 3 years. Since then, we have been doubling the amount of money invested every year. We plan to do it this year again, and together with co-investors, we plan to invest at least $300 million in private equity and real estate this year, which is more than we did even before the 2008-2009 crisis. What makes us particularly confident is the accelerated growth in investments, in GDP, the current account, which if you take into account the remittances, which are not properly accounted for, is less than 2% of GDP, conservative fiscal policy, declining debt to GDP, conservative monetary policy, and also what is very important is the strong support of the population, which by vast majority supports the convergence and integration with the European Union, which is taking place based on the path written in the association and deep and comprehensive free trade agreements. What makes us nervous is the situation with rule of law and with corruption. Solving this very deep-rooted problem is the priority now for the civic society here locally, for our Western partners, for the IFIs, but it should be a priority for business as well, and for investors who have long-term interest in the success of this country. How can one contribute? Again, based on our example, or just to share with you the decisions that we are making in this direction. We support, in particular, economic think tanks, anti-corruption think tanks, and all of them are crowdfunding on their site, so it's perhaps for some of you who want to make a small contribution, economic think tanks like Vox Ukraine or the Kiev School of Economics, or anti-corruption think tanks like Transparency International, which contributed substantially to the procurement system Prozoro, or CPK. They would for sure very much benefit if you paid attention to their activity and made a small contribution to their activity. But most of all, what we support is independent media. Since 2014, we have supported a group of independent journalists, created the leading news publication Novoye Vremya, one of the leading news sites, NVUA, and I'm happy to say that within the next 1 or 2 weeks we will launch an independent, nationwide, only in Ukraine, news and talk radio station, which should further increase the reach of independent news in the country. And we hope that by the summer we will also broadcast to Crimea and to Donetsk and Luhansk. On this note, I would like to pass the floor to the Minister of Finance. He is doing a very good job in terms of fiscal policy. 2017 has been the third year with budget deficit of less than 2.5%. This has brought debt to GDP on a downward path from 80% a year ago to 73% debt to GDP at the end of last year, and we expect it to drop further to 70% or less within the next year. He has also introduced automatic VAT refund last April. This was one of the most corrupt areas in the state fiscal service. Now, from own experience and from experience of members of business associations like the EBA or MCHEM, I can say that this area has become extremely transparent, supports Ukraine's exports. Obviously, the minister has a lot of challenges ahead of him. Some of them are the large share of the state in the banking sector. The Ministry of Finance is responsible as a shareholder for managing these 4 state banks that make up over 50% of the banking sector. The state fiscal service also remains unreformed and is one of the minister's priorities. And last but not least, the Financial Investigation Service, SFR, which has been promised to business for a long time, is struggling with vested interests that are blocking its introduction. So, Mr. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tomas. First of all, I'd like to thank Dragon Capital and personally Tomas for first of all for bringing all of us here, but also for active role that Dragon Capital and Tomas himself does over this, as he said, 24 years. Right? This is clearly important for the country. So, good morning, everyone. We're here for investment conference, but when you look aside, it looks like I'm opening the, Winter Olympics games, and I see that not everyone managed to get, and I hope it's due to the weather conditions, not to the failed doping probe. Well, first of all, the majority in this room are the investors, and you invest in the story of Ukraine. You believe in the positive story, you bet on it, we do it. There are multiple stories around, starting from failed state, usually communicated from one direction, to the absolutely wonderful story, the tiger, from different directions. The truth is in the middle. Also, some people assess Ukraine by what wasn't done. Some assess but what was done. So my message is to assess what could be done in the future, but what we've achieved so far, what was done till now. And what was done is actually quite impressive. And I can say this because It's already my third time in the government. You know, my first time I joined it in 2005. And I remember this is part of my life, and I remember my attitude. I see what was happening around, and I can tell you that I'm extremely impressed with what was achieved over the last 4 years. And let's just look a bit closer, and you will see that the country is different from what it was 4 years ago. Let's just see where we were in 2014. We lost 20% of our industrial potential, 15% accumulated GDP. Inflation hit to almost 44%. That was at its peak. The budget deficit, enormous. The golden currency reserves were at the critically low, almost empty tank level, around $5.5 billion. Currency rapidly depreciated. Well, and war with Russia, not just military, but also trade war. So that's where we were in 2014. How more difficult could it have been? Yes, potentially we could have lost the country. But we didn't. We not just survived, we turned around the trend. We focused on reform agenda despite all the difficulties. We managed to transform the country. So where are we now? We achieved fiscal consolidation. The budget deficit for this year we plan at 2.4%. We stabilized the currency. We increased golden currency reserves of the National Bank to 18.5 billion. That is 3 times increase. Well, obviously, it's also due to the strong support from and progress within IMF program. We returned to international markets, but we also, I think I should have started from this, we returned to growth. So we plan to grow 3% this year. So how it all happened? It wasn't a miracle, it was a hard work. And I actually sometimes wonder myself how I achieved it. And at that time, I just recall circumstances. I recall the people who were involved in this. Some of these people are in the room, for example, Ivaras, right? And when I recall it, I understand that there was no chance for other outcome. That's why we are where we are. And also, just to remind you, the more difficult it is, the more realistic it is to achieve. It's for Ukraine. We got the gold in freestyle. When you look at the complexity, I said that's our style. That's our style. Thank you. But let's see where we should be by now. And that maybe will help us where I want to go. We should be the well-diversified, integrated economy, growing no less than 6% annually, catching up with the lost potential in the past. You know, this is a low inflation level of around 5%. You know, reduced debt level, deficit of around 2%, FDIs times above what we have at the moment. But most importantly, we need to have a happy and confident population that are confident in their future, and happy investors too. So that's where we should be, and that's where we should aim to be. So what are the challenges? We have very strong challenges. Some of them could be addressed. short term, some of them cannot, and we need to live with it. So what are they? They first of all is the population fatigue. 4 years of reform efforts. This is pretty tiring for population, some of them losing trust. Some of them believe more now in populistic promises. That's a challenge. And obviously, the optimal timing for the reforms was 2014, beginning of 2015. I think everybody appreciates this. Again, that's a fact. We cannot change it. Then, deteriorating demography. It's a problem, and we need to recognize it. Can we address it short term? No. I hope we can address it midterm, and it has to be done. Ukraine has the lowest birth rate over the last 15 years. Also, immigration becomes a big issue, especially for those who relied on getting the cheap labor available around the country. They see in some regions that some people who they relied on actually moved to other European countries. That's an issue, again, but that needs to be addressed. Election anxiety. 2018, not an easy year. Many things about election. Think about election. So that's an issue. Vested interest. This is vested interest. Big challenge too, which cannot be addressed short term. It's been for years, and that's, I believe, the main obstacle for the country development. And it's a synonym of corruption. Unreformed institutions. And here, there are some institutions, for example, like unreformed law enforcement agencies, like State Security Service, the tax police, the General Prosecutor Office. They suppress the business. That's a legacy of the Soviet past. They suppress the business, and not just the business, but also people who try to change the country. And that's unfortunately the reality. But this is also not something that cannot be overcome. And interesting that in our IT companies, not only Google, Apple, Amazon are interested. Equal interest have such institutions, but for different reasons. And we need to address this problem. We need to reform these institutions. Without this, we cannot achieve the growth that we aim to achieve. Reform of state fiscal service. There is, I think it's reform number 1. What the problem is, the vested interest in it that constrain the development. Judiciary, you also understand, crucial. But there is also another institutional weakness that not so much suppress or the business or society, but actually makes it more difficult to implement reforms. Given that we are moving like broad front in different directions, we need to have institutional capacity and strength to implement reforms. One thing is to pass the law, another thing is to implement it. And especially this is crucial for the reforms like education reform, healthcare reform, something that actually involves a lot of discipline, commitment, right messaging, and the work on the ground. So those are the challenges. As I said, most of them we cannot change. So they make our path more difficult, but clearly they do not change the trajectory. And we have a clear plan, where are we going to move, and that's what you expect from us as investors, and that's what Ukrainians as citizens expect from the government as a whole. So what are these plans? Well, first is to complete crucial structural reforms like land, energy, healthcare, which bring market where there is no market, or not enough market at the moment. And those reforms are aimed at boosting economic and development. Other reforms, anti-corruption efforts in other direction. This is actually, the goal of these reforms is to address the issues and bring the trust to the government efforts in reforming. And privatization, that it's not just reduces corruption, improves competitive environment, but also privatization, having failed for so many years, it's pretty much also the proof that we can do it and we could make Ukraine great again. I've heard it somewhere. But that's something that we need to do. So let's just go a bit more into details in these reforms, so you would understand, where we are on which of these areas. So land reform. I hope the one Prime Minister will be here. He will also confirm this, that we work hard on developing the model for the land market reform. And we believe that it is crucial for economic development, improving productivity overall of agricultural sector. That reform has been waited for years. We have the model. The question is when we should start this reform. And it is clear, and I think it's understandable, that it's important to start with very strong communication campaign that, especially in pre-election year, will set the right tone and would explain why it is needed and would help us to fight the phobias that have been created for years. But yes, as a government, we support the land market, right? Because we believe in a free economy. Energy sector reform. Talk about tariffs, but it's not only about tariffs. It's about bringing competition to the energy sector. And it's not just unbundling of transportation. We as a government see it as a holistic reform of gas, if we talk about gas sector, right? That unbundling all the business lines and brings competition to all of the segments and make it, bringing competition means reducing the prices. That's how I also communicate. That's why it is important. So don't only think about tariffs. Think about competition. Competition will bring fair prices to the people and to business. So this is what we're doing at the moment. That's what we're discussing with the International Monetary Fund. And we have a very specific plan there. I could talk about later about this. Healthcare reform. This is also one of the most important structural reforms because we bring market where there is no market. Well, where is no official market, because many Ukrainians understand that despite the fact that we have a free healthcare, de facto there is a black market there. And our goal is to turn this black market in a well-regulated, vibrant healthcare that delivers high-quality services to our citizens, and we as the government would make these services available, right? So, is this available? Yeah, I think it's available. Доступнее, як нас будуть? Accessible. Sorry, you see, accessible. Now, on the privatization, there were several breakthroughs. First is the adoption of the law that simplifies the privatization procedures. It was done two weeks ago. So now we focus, as soon as this law is signed, I hope it will going to happen within the next couple of days, maybe even today, by the president. If it's done, then it's after we change the secondary legislation, we'll be ready to restart the process. The biggest complexity will be, of course, is dealing with the wait-and-see approach by many of investors, because pre-election year, why we don't wait and see? So it's a challenge for us how we bring trust to the system, to the process of privatization, but how we also we address this problem. So the answer would be like, if you wait, you lose. How we do it, still don't know. It's in the process, but that will be the answer. Another law which is waiting to be adopted is the concession law. It comes in pair with the privatization law. Pretty much will help the government to move the assets that we ineffectively manage at the moment to the private sector. State-owned banks, yes. After nationalization of Privat bank, we have 55% of banking system, and we've been working for almost a year to draft a strategy in how we address this. I cannot say problem; it's a situation, right? And we adopted the strategy last week that, at large, basically aims to reduce the stake of the state in the banking sector from 55% to 24% by over the next 5 years. On anti-corruption efforts, well, anti-corruption court, I hope today enough Winter Olympics also get to the radar to athletes to support the anti-corruption court at first reading, law on anti-corruption court, and that starts the process that I hope will be completed in April. That's my expectation. I cannot commit to this, but it's my expectation in April. I believe we will have the anti-corruption court law adopted, which would allow us to move to the next stage of implementing this, this law and building independent professional anti-corruption court. State fiscal service. That's priority number one for me, and I believe it's number one reform for the country, because that's institution that actually work directly with business, and they're responsible for the fairness, they're responsible for the business climate, and we launched some initiatives like transparent VAT refunds, some other, the single window on customs. Those are help to eliminate corruption in certain areas, but the real impact will be, and it will be visible to everyone, when we move to the institutional reform, which involves changing the people. Because when you have contact between, a bureaucrat and businessman or taxpayer, not just not businessman, taxpayer, right? If the person on the government side was involved in bad practices in the past, there is a high likelihood that it will not be able to work under new rules. So we need to change the people in the state fiscal service. And that's a plan for this year. Financial investigation service. There is a big battle in the country in the moment. It's a very serious battle. Some try to preserve the powers of State Secret Service, General Prosecutor Office, National Police, others, because they historically get used to their work. But there is a big pressure on the side of business. We need a new reality, right? We don't want this institution coming and harassing us, right? We want, we want to develop. And so the answer to that battle, and that was answer provided by the government, is the law on the creation of financial investigation service, which was adopted by the government last year, but somewhere stuck in the process. But again, we're committed, despite all the resistance, to move forward and create this institution. Why? Not only because it improves the business climate. But also it addresses other problems. Is at the moment there is no one trusted institution in the country that could investigate economic crimes against the state. And so I, as a minister, of course, can count for the billions that were lost, either it was in the banking system or through the tax frauds. But there should be an answer. How we get this money back, and how we ensure that there is no such violations and crimes in the future. And at the moment, there is no single institution that could provide an answer to this question. So creation of such institution, Financial Investigation Service, is important for that reason as well, because that's an answer. And that's also the plan for this year. And I'll briefly finish with anti-money laundering initiatives and BEPS. You know, this is what we as a ministry working hard as well. We initiated the new law on the anti-money laundering. And on BEPS, the plan is to adopt the all minimum requirements by the end of this year. Yes, there is also some resistance, but we paving our path through this. So that's where we are. We are moving forward. We are building not just story, but we are building the country. And I hope that our goal is to be, to the maximum extent, transparent, so that you understand our plans, you understand our challenges, then you would be able to make your investment decision accordingly. But if you're here, it means that you believe in us, and be with us. We will make this country prosperous, that our people deserve. Thank you very much.